Welcome back, everybody, to another installment of On the Fly, casual conversations around coaching youth lacrosse. Very excited to introduce our guest today, Madison Ahern, a University of Notre Dame alum, also a member of Team USA and the guard from WLL. And so really excited to have you on this episode and talk a little bit about coaching and hopefully add some value to youth coaches out there. So thank you so much for joining us. If you don't mind, just give us a quick intro, who you are, where you come from, and why this game means so much to you and how you got where you are today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be on the podcast today. Like Martin said, I'm Madison. I played at Notre Dame for 5 years. Since playing at Notre Dame, I have played professionally with Athletes Unlimited to start, and now with the new Women's Lacrosse League, the WLL, with the Boston Guard. Really cool to represent Boston. I'm actually the only player on the team from Boston. Uh, Really cool to be able to kind of represent the city that I grew up playing in and coming through Mass Youth Lacrosse. I'm from Cohasset, Massachusetts, so a local lacrosse player here. But yeah, I've been coaching some kids around Massachusetts since graduating. Also, I live in Connecticut, or I live in New York now, but I've been coaching kids in Connecticut, New Jersey, New York as well. So really excited to share some insight today about kind of some things that I've found that have been successful coaching and being coached, I guess, still as a player.
Love it. Yeah, it's a friendly reminder too as coaches, we want to be students first. We want to be curious. And so, we were lucky enough to have you actually do some of our coach support. For those who don't know, at Mass Youth Lacrosse, one of my main roles is supporting youth coaches around the state. And so we tend to try to get out to coaches' practices. And I was lucky to get you involved last spring and actually visiting some youth practices. So really excited to learn from you some of what you did at those practices and what works well for you. So hopefully we can cover a range of topics today. Let's start with kind of where coaches would start at the beginning of practice, right? Everyone starts with skills for the most part. Maybe at the younger ages, you're playing Hungry Hippos and Sharks and Minnows and things like that to get the kids excited. But for the most part, we're tasked with, can we get the level of skill to at least, some level of competency so that we can kind of control the ball and the stick and start to be able to pass and catch on the move. So where do you start and how do you think about, teaching some of the basics while also managing, some of these players are really struggling to hold the stick correctly and the hand-eye coordination isn't there. Well, simultaneously, you've got some, girls or boys over here that they've gotten a few years of, club coaching and experience that they know how to throw a behind the back pass. And there's just such that spectrum of ability. So yeah, where do you start and how do you think about sort of making things contextualized?
Yeah, I think there's so many different stick work drills that you could throw at the group that you have in front of you. Sometimes the simpler is honestly better. I usually like to start with just partner passing, which again is very simple but very effective when you have a group with varying levels of experience playing the game, as maybe they can team up with one of their friends who have been playing club with them for 3 or 4 years, or a new player could team up with someone who also is new or maybe has a couple extra years of experience so they can learn from them. So you can kind of customize the group and maybe have a couple coaches walking around talking to the kids who maybe aren't advancing as quickly through the progression of stick work. And then another coach kind of challenging the kids that look like they're moving through it pretty quickly, excelling at the basics to start and giving them a couple pointers to make the stick work a little bit more challenging for them. I think an overarching coaching principle that I've always had is that the main goal is to keep everybody in the group loving the game and improving at the same time. If someone's bored with the stick work, they're not going to be loving the game and they're not going to be improving. So challenging those players with more experience with maybe more creative stick work. And then, if the kids that have a little bit less experience, if they're really too challenged with really challenging stick work, they're also not going to be loving the game and they might be on their way to improving, but they're not really loving what they're doing. So you might kind of stunt their love of the game and their desire to keep coming back and improving. So I think, customizing that stick work at the beginning is very important to set the pace for the rest of the practice.
Right. Yeah, and I'm hearing you say, right off the bat, when you're pairing, that's part of the the choice that we have as a coach. But let's say we're going down the route of like, hey, let's let the better players partner together. Let's let the newer players partner together. And so, what are some of the things that you're saying to those kind of more experienced players? Is it like different release points? What are some of those first things that you would do to challenge them?
Yeah, I think obviously you start with your stick work with, you know, right-handed overhand passes, left-handed overhand passes, maybe some splits, maybe some working the offside, catching offside, all of those more simple basic stick work routine components, but maybe they're moving through that a little bit quicker as opposed to maybe some of the kids who are still getting those down. So I think that next tier of stick work is, throwing behind the backs. It's maybe a Twizzler, maybe faking a little bit more as they're doing some of those more simple passes, also using their offhand a little bit more. But yeah, different release points are always a great idea as well. Maybe some sidearms in there, maybe some underhand passes, or maybe using one hand versus two.
Hmm.
So all those things can be kind of added to give a little bit of extra challenge.
And how do you think about giving athletes context to like strong hand versus weak hand and like all these different release points that we could work on? Do we need to do them all on both sides? Right? Like, how do you think about that?
I think I personally have always, every time I do stick work, I kind of do the same routine every time as a player. And everything is the same exact on both sides. But obviously, at a professional level, I'm not a youth player. But to start off, I would try to do everything righty and lefty. The lefties might have been failing multiple times in a row in practice. But I think it's important to just get yourself in the mindset of doing the same thing on both sides because it will translate on the field. And then I guess like after the stick work part of practice, you're moving more into more drills around like the net or maybe an open field. But those are kind of the times to show the context of what you just practiced in stick work, whether that's like using an outside hand running up the field, or maybe you're passing around the 8 meter or the scoring zone. Understanding that you're supposed to catch with your outside hand and switch and then pass with your outside hand on the way out of the pass. So all of those things can kind of come together and as you go throughout your practices.
Yeah. And then for those kind of newer players that are, let's say, struggling to throw and catch at all on their strong hand, even, are you giving them any particular cues or just not telling them to switch up the release points yet and kind of waiting to get to a certain level? How do you think about like really catering to those kids?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. Maybe not advancing them too far so that they get too discouraged, but also kind of reminding them to have soft hands. I think that's a huge, huge part of catching, and catching is the hardest part of starting to play lacrosse. Once you can catch, you can do anything, and then honestly, getting better is addicting. I think in lacrosse, especially at like the youth level. So that first aha moment of having soft hands and kind of coming back and having the ball fall right in there. I think that's crucial, but that can definitely be, you can have your one off with the kid and kind of show them that that's just the secret sauce.
Yeah, right. And like that aha moment, witnessing that is such a, dopamine boost for us as coaches, right? Seeing a player be like, what? Like I caught it, like it's special to be able to create that environment for them. Two things I would add on here for coaches to think about is using tennis balls can be helpful, right? Having a softer hand can be sort of, you can have the hand forced. If the soft hands isn't there with a tennis ball, it is very clear. Like it's just so much harder to catch a tennis ball because it's lighter. So that can be something, for coaches to try out. The other thing to kind of think about in this partner passing environment is like some of the first additions of movement to that drill. We don't necessarily need to like go get in two lines over here. So we start running and passing across this way. You can do that. But while you're in your partner passing, you can say something like, all right, partner A, when I blow this whistle, you're going to start walking forward. Partner B, you're going to start walking backward. And so you're kind of maintaining that same distance of the partnership, but one partner's walking forwards and one partner's walking backwards while that game of catch continues. Blow the whistle again, we start moving back the other way. So just something for coaches to think about. It's a challenge to keep kids engaged in stick work in general, right? To make it feel fun. You kind of have to keep switching it up and adding components, and then or else you start to lose kids, right? What do you think about giving, homework, right? Like you mentioned, in our previous conversation that like you kind of have like a go-to routine. Is that something that you change based on, let's say, if it's a fourth grade team versus an eighth grade team versus a high school team? Is it the same for you? Do the reps change? And like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think it does change. As you get older and more advanced, you should always be trying to improve your stick work. It can honestly never be too good. So I think, as we talked about those more basic movements, maybe that you're teaching everybody, and then you get more advanced with more creative things. That kind of goes the same for when you increase the age. So maybe at the younger levels, you're working on more basic overhand passes, you're working on switching, all those things. And then as you get older, you're working on, you know, different release points, different creative movements, different ways to move your stick because their control already is pretty good. But yeah, I think it does actually kind of go with the skill level because there could be a new player in eighth grade that still doesn't know how to catch, which is totally fine. But, just it's skill level and age, I would say. And in terms of a routine, I think, like that homework piece, I had mentioned to you before that, I had nobody in my family that played lacrosse, and I my sister was not into it, and my dad had offered to kinda help me, like, learn how to catch, and he had no idea how to play, didn't have a stick or anything, and we would sit at the bus stop, and he'd, like, underhand throw the passes to me, and I'd miss every single one of them. But, eventually I had that aha moment, caught it, figured it out, and then every time at practice when we'd have a routine, I would come home and bring it to him, and he finally got a stick, and we would practice it, and I had something I could bring home to him even though he had no idea anything about lacrosse. But I think that just goes to show the impact that my youth coaches had on me, giving me some wisdom to bring back with me so I could do the homework at home. But if I didn't have like a routine or something I was excited to bring back to practice the next time and master, then I might not have progressed as quickly.
And would you say you spent more time, like in this example with your father, just like playing wall ball? Or was it kind of a split? Like, do you feel like that's an advantage? Because I know a lot of people that are just like, here's my wall ball routine. And like what I'm hearing you say is like, well, you can just take that routine and include someone else in it, even if they're not a lacrosse person. And that can have its own value to kind of, there's that connection component, there's the development together. And I think there's a lot of power in that. And yeah, is that accurate? Were you doing more partner passing with your dad who didn't know how to play lax than wall ball?
Yes, absolutely. I've actually never really been a big wall ball fan, honestly, until I moved to New York and I had to. But yeah, I honestly love partner passing. I would prefer it any day over wall ball. First of all, it's more enjoyable. You're doing it with someone else and having a nice conversation. They can give you feedback as to where you're throwing the ball, especially someone who can't catch well, like, my dad. It has to be perfect or else they're not going to catch it. And then I think being able to catch a pass from somebody else rather than a wall, it could be like kind of predictable when you're throwing against a wall. But if someone else is throwing you passes and, bad passes, you have to be able to react and adjust. So that helps when you get into a real game situation and maybe you're catching a really bad pass on the inside and you can handle it easily and finish.
So you recently played in the sixes, professional sixes tournament. You guys didn't come out on top, but you had a great performance. We got to see some highlights of you playing. This is for the WL. This is for the guard, right? And so I just saw a clip of you, right to left split dodge down the lefty alley. I think it went viral. You're ripping out the top right corner. How do you teach that to kids, right? Where do you start? And so, yeah, what's your thought process on you going from that first phase of practice to the second phase of practice? What are your focus points and how do you, progress those?
I think when you're teaching dodging, it's also very simple. You don't need to have some crazy complex drill. You can throw one cone down and teach the dance steps of the dodge. That's kind of how I've always viewed it as a player and as a coach. You're teaching them, first coming up to the cone or the defender, whoever it is, with a stutter step, and then which feet are you stepping on? Are you going left, right, left? Are you going right, left? Kind of like working through the basics of how your footwork is. That's always been helpful for me as a coach. And then once they're kind of getting those dance steps down, as I would call them, you're adding for maybe the kids that are a little bit more advanced or they're getting it a little bit quicker, then you're adding like where's your head looking? Where is your bottom hand is maybe jabbing to give a little extra to the step. So adding those little things will allow you to customize it to the skill level of the kids as well. And then, once they get one move down, maybe you're adding a progression. So you're doing that same move and then you're adding another move right out of it. So they're working on two different dodges at once and they're really repping out that first dodge a bunch of times because they're doing it alone and then they're doing it with another dodge. You can even add a third dodge or a fourth dodge as well to kind of keep that muscle memory going. They're also building confidence in the first dodge to get them through maybe learning the next one. And then you could add defenders to make it a little bit more challenging once they've gotten the dance steps down, all the faking and everything down. And then you could also add maybe a pass out of those dodges to encourage maybe some more team offense where you're dodging, feeding out of that dodge, and then maybe the other person's scoring. So a lot of opportunities for progression there, but starting with the dance steps and really breaking it down as simple as possible to start so that they really get they understand why they're stepping a certain way or where they want their
Totally.
dance to go.
Yeah, I love that phrase dance steps. I've never heard that before. I think that's going to click with a lot of coaches. That you said a lot there. That's really, really helpful. One thing I want to pull out that I'm hearing is you need a high volume of repetitions of something that's really simple, and then you can kind of stack on top of that. So I'm picturing a group of athletes that are maybe with or even without a ball, because you can focus more on the footwork and just like jab stepping, and maybe there's a shoulder turn involved with that, but you're getting a high volume of reps of something very specific, and then you're going to sort of back them up from where they're going to be making that move so they can kind of lead into it. And then as they come out of the dodge a certain amount of times, then you can add, maybe there's a secondary dodge or some kind of hesitation move or a decision to be made. Am I going to pass this or am I going to shoot it? So like, where do you like, where was the actual starting point? Is it just one jab step, or you getting them in a line and have them do like, what's the first part of that?
Yeah. So I think actually the first part of it before you even get into like a dodging drill would be to put two cones, maybe 15 yards apart, I would say. And have a line behind I mean, you could have multiple of these if you have a lot of kids, but having the person start at one cone, blowing a whistle, having them start, and they're working on their stutter step. And they're stutter stepping basically 15 yards, but you're blowing the whistle intermittently and they have to maybe hit a little jab. So they're stuttering, jab whenever the whistle goes. So that kind of works on that first jab step. Um,
Love it.
I've always found that that's helpful, especially with younger kids who maybe haven't learned the basics of dodging yet. And then kind of jumping into maybe setting up a line on the and having them come in and do the jab step on a defender. Maybe the next dodge is like a split dodge with a couple jabs in it. So kind of building up
Yeah. So
there.
you're adding that context later, right? I love that. So just to make sure coaches understand, you can have everyone lined up. There's 15-yard increment. When you blow the whistle, they're doing essentially a foot fire with a little bit of forward momentum. And then on the whistles, it's like jab step. So they're kind of jogging in a little bit, not in place, but slightly moving forward as they're kind of tiptoeing their way forward. And that's also a good time where maybe you're working with a higher level, maybe seventh or eighth grade team. It's like while they're doing that, forward momentum footwork, like maybe they're saying how many fingers you have on your hand or some sort of thing that keeps them conscious. But that jab step is sort of the real thing they're repping out. And then you're gonna, okay, let's go into a dodge and come out of a dodge and either, feed or pass or add a secondary dodge before one of those two things, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And let's say, so now we're in drill mode, right? So we kind of start with skills. Now we're going into the drills or stations part of practice. One of those stations is focused on dodging, let's say, right? What else needs to be in that? Like what's either next or like what else are we, adding to the list of, coaches should be doing what?
In terms of a dodging drill, if you're adding on to it, I would have it become more of a team concept. So maybe you have that same dodge coming down the wing, and then maybe you're hitting somebody behind the net and they're hitting somebody back up the other wing. And maybe they're doing a dodge or they're just cutting and taking their shot. So understanding the concept that, you don't just have to dodge to shoot and score. You can dodge to make a great pass, set up your teammate on the other side of the field. That might be more of a higher level or an older level type of drill, but it also, I mean, it's a concept that younger kids will understand as well because, you're getting somebody open on the other side of the field if you're drawing all the defenders to you. So I think that's a great progression. Also, switching up the shot is another way to kind of elevate that simple dodging drill and elevating the shot in different ways.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think, sometimes we overthink it as coaches. We're like, maybe my girls aren't that great at passing and catching yet. So working on dodging and two more passes to a shot, like we're not ready for that. But I mean, you could think of it as it's really just a stick work drill. Hey, you're gonna do, stick work from right to left at this cone. Maybe you're making that pass lefty, maybe you're swiveling and making that pass righty to that cone, and then that cone's gonna pass to that cone, and they're gonna try to shoot. So we don't need to like explain to the group, hey, this is working on dodging, drawing a slide, moving it to the backside, because that starts to feel like, this isn't realistic for my first and second graders or my third and fourth graders. But it is to just set these cones up, and maybe the net is or isn't in place. It's just, can you get them to move and share the ball? And then I think it's nice too to be able to be like, we can build empathy. Like you can be like, oh, like the point of dodging isn't to take it myself. It's to draw the defense, draw the attention of the defense, shift things so space opens up and we can move the ball. And maybe the first and second graders don't understand that, but we can still work towards it, right? So let's talk about shooting. So where do we start? How do you think about, catering to, let's say, different ages, as well as that same concept of like, still some of these girls or boys are having trouble with hand-eye coordination, while simultaneously some of them are, bored by the basics.
Yeah. I think the easiest shot to probably take is one that's stationary. Once you're adding movement, you're worrying about a couple different things at once. So I've always started maybe with the younger kids or the maybe newer players with having a couple, maybe 5 lines across, not necessarily the 8 meter, but a couple steps in, having them on one knee so they realize, kind of what's going on with their hands rather than worrying about their legs and feet and hands at the same time. So having them on one knee, having a partner place the ball back into their stick, taking a shot maybe on a whistle.
Now,
And
does it
kind of,
matter which, let's say they're righty, does it matter which knee is down, or would you
yes,
do
it should be
both?
their, if they're shooting righty, their left knee should be up, so it should be the opposite. You're
Right knee
kind of
down.
already,
Yep.
yes, right knee down. So you're kind of teaching them,
Pointing, feet pointed towards the target already, so just the upper body is turning.
yes, and they're slamming that stick onto the ground so that they're following all the way through. And you're also kind of teaching them that which foot you should be shooting off of without actually teaching you, because it'll feel a little bit more comfortable when they stand up. Uh, so that's maybe with the younger kids. They don't have to catch a ball first. They're just getting the ball placed in their stick. They're not worried about catching and then shooting. They're just worrying about shooting. So you're building that skill without the stick work almost. And then, as they get a little bit better at that, they're standing up, maybe getting the ball placed in their stick, doing the same thing, but just having, their footwork maybe move forward a little bit, a little shuffle and then shot. So we're able to elevate it in that way. And then, maybe eventually you have a passer passing from low to high to those lines. So now they're actually catching, taking that shot. So that's kind of the progression there. In terms of like placement of shots, if we're doing this with kids that are a little bit older, you probably start with the pass to the shot. But in terms of their placement, starting with like a high release point, shooting down low to the bottom corners. That's always the most reliable shot, but maybe not the most fun or creative shots. But those are always important to kind of lock in the form as they keep going throughout the drill. Maybe you're hitting the high corners, setting different targets. And then, if they're a very advanced team, maybe then you're switching up the release point that they've been practicing in the stick work beforehand. And they're throwing some sidearms in there. And those only really are okay to use once you've mastered the basics at the beginning. So I think that's always helpful with the shooting component.
Got it. So we're starting from a kneeling position. We're kind of building in the fact that they're going to need some more focused energy on what their hands are doing. The stick is coming over and making contact with the ground. So that's perfectly normal when that happens. So almost expect that. You almost want to coach that, right? You're not having them slow down their stick, right? So it doesn't hit the ground so hard. You want them to kind of follow through hard and hit the ground there, right?
Yes, definitely. And I think from those low spots with your knee up, it's actually probably easier to slam your stick on the ground and shoot low. So you're kind of building that good habit of shooting low, which maybe is not the most exciting shot, but it's a lot of times the most effective.
Sure, and I think that's another example of a drill. We've talked about this in the past on this podcast, which is you don't actually need to start with the ball even. You know, one of the things that sometimes athletes can appreciate is the feedback of the sound that the stick makes, right? And as
Mhm.
you're kind of coming through before it hits the ground, you're kind of hearing that like that wind noise. And sometimes athletes that are really new can really benefit from that as a focus point of like when they hear that, it's like they can feel there's like some fluidity to their motion and all of a sudden things can start to click. So from there, you're going to stand them up, or are you waiting to do that till next week? Or are you going to do the whole drill kneeling and then add a pass? So now you're catching into the shot. Is that kind of the basic progression there?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on how they're doing with the knee down. If they're crushing it and they're all feeling good about themselves, maybe you stand them up and make it another challenge that they can get a couple reps in, and then maybe you switch the drill so they have something that they can work on before the next practice. And then you could
Hmm.
start them standing up, or you give them a little taste of it. But if they're still struggling with kind of being on the ground, I would just switch the drill, and then maybe the next week do a recap of that and introduce the standing up component. So kind of depends on the success rate of the kids that are on the field at the time.
Sure. And this would be an example of you're going to want to do, however many reps righty, and then that same amount, if not maybe even more, on the weak hand to make sure that they're kind of experiencing that. Are you delaying that, and or are you starting with like making sure you're doing both sides?
I would say maybe just starting with dominant if the kids are newer and a little bit less experienced, just to kind of build that confidence. I think honestly, when they move to their left hand, they should probably have that standing form down so that they can replicate that on their left hand. You know, I think coaches always say try to do the exact same thing on your non dominant hand that you're doing on your dominant hand. If you haven't really experienced that sensation, or maybe like found some success with your hands up high, taking a great shot on your feet, then it might be a little bit hard to translate to that opposite side that's just by nature more uncomfortable. So maybe getting that hand down first and then going to the non dominant hand and kind of switching off between the two so that they can compare between their dominant and their non dominant.
Right. And when you first started describing this, you said you had like 5 cones. Does it need to be five? Is it like just depends how big your group is, and why is that? So there's more people shooting at once, so there's not one long line, or is there another reason behind that?
Mm. Yeah, I honestly would just say 5 because of, at least for the girls, for an 8 meter, there's 5 hashes, so it's pretty easy to just space out appropriately. And honestly, if you have less kids, you could do like 3 hashes, and just pulling it a couple yards in. And if you're just with a couple kids, you could just have one position, and just kind of nail that position down and then move into the middle, move to the other side just to get some different angles on your shots, and you could have them kind of switch between those 5 cones if you do have the 5, so that they have a little bit of a different angle every time.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like that's a good segue into talking about 8 meters, right? So you're kind of in that thought process as you're in different areas of in relation to the cage. And as they get stronger, maybe we're backing them up closer to the actual eight. Is teaching how to take an 8 meter shot or like a play that goes with that. Is that something that a first and second grade team can work on? Is it even worth it? Or do you wait and like where do you start and how do you progress that?
I think honestly 8 meters should be taught from the beginning. So a first and second grade team, I mean, the teaching cues might be a little bit simpler, but I think they should always be practicing them, because it is such a big part of the game. Maybe for first and second graders, all you're working on is their reaction time coming off, blowing a whistle and just having them run as fast as they can towards the net and get a good shot off. That's kind of, that's the goal for them. But to have them be practicing with either without a defender or maybe one defender on the side where their stick is, that will be very helpful for them. And, as they get older, they'll be able to build on that. As you get a little bit older with the kids, I would say probably fourth, fifth grade, if you have some kids that are more experienced, you could start kind of giving them a little bit more pointed advice on 8 meters, mostly just in terms of setup, having everyone having like, you could have 3 lines, you could have one person on the first inside hash, one person in the center hash, one person on the first inside hash from the other side, and then having defenders on the hashes to the right and left of them. But first, giving kind of some cues for running it in, maybe where to put your foot, position it, a little bit to but to the left of the hash, or to get a couple extra inches before you're running in, or running a little bit to the side so that you're kind of running away from the girl on your stick side. Some like small things. If they're playing club and maybe they're a little bit more advanced, it's more of a one-off conversation. If they're newer, obviously they're just kind of running in trying to score. They don't need to be thinking about too much. But then, as you get older to seventh and eighth grade and high school, it's more important to kind of teach that stationary time and room shot, as it's become such a big part of the women's game in recent years. And some important tips on those. I would say a lot of people are trying to shoot sidearm when they're first trying to shoot those, because I feel like girls mostly get more power with a sidearm than they would with like an overhand shot. At least I do. But it's important to start simple, like we were with the shooting progression, starting them off with shooting high, a high release point, and shooting low is going to be way more effective for them than trying to shoot a sidearm top corner to start it off. So they can build up to that, but nailing down that reliable shot, so when they do try it for the first time in a game, it will be a little bit more rewarding, and they won't lose their confidence in kind of trying something new there.
What is your progression of you started to kind of shape it for us? You have some stick work to start, then you're going into drills. But if you were to just like build us a practice plan, how do you think about the things that you want to do, regardless of kind of like what time of year, if it's like the beginning of the season or later in the season or preseason, like what are your tried and true things? You're going to kind of do ABC. What are those for you?
I would say always starting with stick work, which we covered, then doing some sort of station work, depending on how many coaches you have. And in those stations, a dodging station, a shooting station, and then maybe some sort of ground ball, footwork, defensive drill. I'm an attacker, so I don't necessarily, I don't go as in depth with those drills, but there are some great footwork and ground ball drills that I used to do at Notre Dame all the time. That those are important parts of the game that need to be practiced. They're not as fun as the shooting and dodging drills necessarily, but those things can be worked on. And like working together to pick up a ground ball, or going in with a partner to a ground ball and boxing out for each other. Like all those things are important. Then I would say after those stations, if you're thinking about like an hour long practice, then you're getting into maybe some drills where everybody's playing together. So you could do maybe like a man up, man down situation. I always love like a true north, a little 3v2 from low into a 4v3 from high. Important to kind of learn how to work in different spaces, whether that's behind the net or up top as an offensive player, also as a defensive player. So kind of working from two different points of attack is great. I think like building a well-rounded player is super important in youth, so that, if they end up playing at the next level, or whatever, in high school, college, whatever, they can kind of play wherever they want. I think my coaches always did a great job of that. So everyone was like a full purpose player. So kind of having both people or everyone play offense and defense in that sort of man up, man down situation. Then maybe playing like more of a settled 7v7, having some sort of competition with that is always great. And always ending with 8 meters. I think that's a non-negotiable. And that can be competitive too. You can have some practice worked in there, but then maybe with some of the older kids or maybe a team that's a lot of the kids are like kind of on the same level of skill, you can make it more of a competition between, two teams. They can see who can get the most free positions out of 10 or something like that, just to add some fun competitive energy to the end of the practice. And then I guess last thing for the practice would be to ask like 3 things that people learned. I always think reminding people of new things that they learned at the end of practice as they're leaving is really important, as they can go home and that's what's fresh on their mind. It's not maybe like the dropped pass that they had. It's something that they can actually look towards the future and improve on in their own game, and kind of leave them with some hope and some excitement about what's next for them.
Love it. Not easy to do, but clearly an important part of this job as we coach. Clearly, the athletes that have had the chance to be coached by you are very lucky. If you were to think about what are some of the, I guess, like overarching coaching principles, really just for you in particular, right? What are the things that you think about or say to the group that help garner excitement and help bring out more effort? Because that's one of the hardest parts about coaching youth, maybe coaching in general, but really coaching youth in particular, where like, some of those kids don't love lacrosse. Their parents just signed them up and dropped them off, right? So is there any tricks that you have to kind of get them going, and what could other coaches pull from that?
Yeah, I think like every one-off conversation that you have with the kid kind of shapes how they feel about the practice that they're at, or maybe even the sport. I actually like absolutely hated lacrosse when I first started, so I can relate to this. I wanted to quit my first year, and then I became really good friends with the girls that I was playing with. So I think like building the connections with, the girls on the team and having like that competitive spirit and encouraging the collaboration maybe between the girls who are less experienced with the kids who are, once you kind of bring everyone together in those final couple drills, is so important, because they're maybe the newer players are learning from the kids who have more experience, and they're wanting to, reach that standard that they're setting. And the kids who maybe have more experience are learning, like you said, empathy, and they're learning how to be a good teammate and how to support each other. So I think like fostering the relationships between the kids there, that's not necessarily something that is, you know, very obvious, but that helps, because if you're a newer player and you are, really enjoying being with the girls on the team, you want to reach their level so you can keep playing with them and maybe, be a little bit more involved in the play or whatever. That's kind of, I mean, that's like my personal what happened to me. So, yeah, you want to inspire them to kind of reach that level of the better kids on the field.
Love it. Well, this has been really insightful. I so appreciate your time. It's a joy to talk with you about this. And, you're clearly a solid coach in the way you think about and approach this, but you're also an incredible role model, not just for young girls, but for just young athletes to like stick with it. Even if you want to quit the first year you play, stick with it. Encourage your parent or a guardian to play with you, even if they don't know how to play. There's a lot of power in your story, and a lot of things that I think coaches will gain from this. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Mass Youth Lax for powering this. And thank you so much to the listeners out there who take time to listen to this. And please give us feedback on what you like and what you want to hear about and who you want to hear from in the future. And I will see you all next week. Thank you, Madison.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.